fight fans? Welcome back to Technical Knockout, the MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Hussein, and today we are going to be talking about UFC 312, featuring Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland 2, as well as Tatiana Suarez getting her first crack at gold against Weili Zhang. There's a couple other good fights on here, not a ton of them, but we're going to break down the card top to bottom either way because I love you guys and I love the sport and I know you do too, and that's why we're here. UFC is going down to Australia. I think they're in Perth. No, they're in Sydney this time. Down under. And, as is tradition, we have a decent card. Not great. I feel like the UFC doesn't really show much love to the Australian crowd, I'll be honest. You know what I mean? I don't want to, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not taking any names or placing any blame. But, I don't know. For me, I just feel like all these Aussie cards typically end up one or two people that you recognize and then just a bunch of local fighters, which, I understand. It's a good way of doing things. But, that works well in the prelims. But in the main card, I think, on a pay-per-view with a big crowd, I'd like to see some divisional relevance, you know what I mean? But, to quote the great Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, you can't always get what you want. And this weekend, we have a lot of things that we don't want, but, altogether, not a bad card. So let's talk about the rematch at the top of the bill for the middleweight championship. You have Dricus du Plessis, the champ, coming in to make his second title defense against Sean Strickland, the former champ. Now, du Plessis did take the belt off of Strickland in their first fight. It was a very close fight, split decision. I felt personally that du Plessis clearly won rounds 2, 3, and 4. Strickland won rounds 1 and 5. But, there was an argument to be made that Strickland won the third round. I mean, even the second round was kind of close, if I remember correctly. But regardless, I felt like du Plessis won. I thought it was right that he got the nod. And since that fight, du Plessis has beaten Adesanya by finish, and Strickland has beaten Paulo Costa in one of the most boring fights I've ever seen. So here we are, we're back, baby. And even though middleweight is ripe with a shit ton of really great contenders right now, most recently Imavov beating Adesanya by knockout last week. That was crazy. Hamzat beating Robert Whittaker by submission in the first round. You got Kyle Borralho waiting in the wings as well. For some reason, we get the Sean Strickland rematch. Maybe it's the rub. Maybe it's because Trump won. I don't know. Whatever, dude. I was at Strickland's last fight against Paulo Costa, and I have never seen a crowd turn on a fighter so hard from their performance. Before the fight, Trump was in attendance, I believe, that night. And before the fight, there was a lot of, let's just, call it how it is, pro-American bias. Every American fighter that was up, the crowd would go crazy for, and anybody who wasn't American, they, would boo. Really, lowbrow shit, honestly, from the Newark crowd, and not what I would expect, but it is what it is. So, yeah, Strickland got all the cheers coming into the cage. Paulo Costa got all the boos. And then Strickland put on one of the worst performances. Let's not say the worst performance, because he definitely won. One of the most boring performances and low-risk performances I've ever seen. Didn't take any risk until the last 5-10 seconds of the fight. It was a very frustrating fight to watch, a very boring fight to watch, and then by the end the crowd was booing him. So, he turned a pro-Strickland crowd into an anti-Strickland crowd, and I was, not shocked considering that I think a lot of people are fans of this guy because they haven't seen him fight. They've only heard him talk or whatever, maybe they've just seen the highlight reels. But regardless of the politics and everything that surrounds the fight, let's talk about the actual breakdown of the fight itself. Now, in the first fight, Strickland was able to have success with his jab, with his teep, with his, his circling around the cage and kind of frustrating du Plessis to a certain extent. Like I said, he won the first and fifth rounds, in my opinion. Fifth round, he turned it up on du Plessis, who looked like the gas was starting to drop. But, first round, Strickland just kind of outpointed him. Fifth round, he won pretty decisively, I felt. But yeah, he uses the same tools every fight. Have you seen a Sean Strickland fight? You've seen them all. The guy moves forward, he jabs, he throws a 1-2, he throws a teep to the gut. I felt like he could have used the teep more in the first fight. I think he didn't use it a ton. He did end up getting grappled a lot in the second, third, and fourth round, so perhaps that was a read that him and his camp made that they shouldn't be throwing the teep in case du Plessis can turn it into a takedown attempt. But, regardless, that's kind of how the fight played out. There was some ebbs and flows in there, but for the most part, it was DDP on the ground, DDP landing harder strikes, DDP being more aggressive, and Strickland winning a couple of rounds on volume and pace. Now, this weekend, I don't expect a ton to be different, but we're going to talk about how both of these fighters can change their approach from the first fight and make this victory a little bit more decisive. Considering how close that first fight was, I'm sure both DDP and Strickland want to, maybe not take it out of the judges' hands, but make it more convincing for the judges this go around. Now, DDP is a man who largely finishes every fight. The only fight he hasn't finished in the last 5 years is Strickland, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so he beat Brad Tavares by decision and Sean Strickland by decision, and that's the only decisions he has on his record since ever. Those are the only two decisions. So he has two decisions in the last 10 years of fighting or so. And one of those is Sean Strickland. So Strickland has proven to be hard to put away for DDP. This go around, I'm not sure that he'll find the finish, but I think that he will go to the grappling earlier in this matchup. I think that DDP has a little bit more. How do I put this? So Strickland could have added the teep a lot more in that first fight, like I said. That's something that he could improve upon. That being said, I do feel like, and other people have attested to this, people have trained with Sean Strickland, people have fought Sean Strickland. Nobody has a rematch against Strickland, but everybody says that when they first train with him, the first rounds always go to Strickland. He has a very unique style. It's kind of hard to figure out, and frequently he'll win that first exchange or that first round or first foray that they have. Second time they train, second time they fight, the other guy can pick up on those things a lot better. Now, DDP strikes me as the type, regardless of what he looks like in the cage, he strikes me as the type of guy who studies his opponents very well and will adjust and adapt. Strickland as well will adjust and adapt, but again, he really does have a very limited skill set. Like, we're not going to see him go for some takedowns in this fight. We're not going to see him go for some head kicks. We're not going to see him go for even really pronounced aggressive striking exchanges. We're going to see him try to, sort of slow things down and just kind of poke and prod at DDP and frustrate him. In my opinion, we're going to see DDP try to flail forward and hit Strickland harder than he got hit and take this fight to the ground when he can. When I lay the map out like that, I do feel like DDP has a bit more to change in this fight as far as his approach goes and his avenues of success. He did win those middle 3 rounds, but again, a couple of them were pretty close, and I think that he can, if he really employs that grappling game, if he maybe lands a little bit more body shots to Strickland via the body kicks, because Strickland is not a takedown threat. He can kind of throw those body kicks with impunity, and DDP has some pretty dexterous kicks, believe it or not, looking at the build of him. I feel like Strickland, I think DDP has more to gain in this matchup, and I think he has more tools that he can show off that he did not show in the first fight. So I am relatively confident in Dricus du Plessis here. I do feel like Strickland has a great chance of winning, and if this fight goes to decision, who knows what's going to happen. Ultimately, I am going to take DDP, but I think the safest bet in this fight is to bet the over 3.5 or 4.5, whatever the line is set at. I think this fight will go to decision again. If DDP can get a finish, I'll be very happy, but I really don't see Strickland getting a finish in this fight. du Plessis has been very hard to put away in the past, only having one loss by finish, and that was against Roberto Soldic, RoboCop, who is one of the best fighters to never fight in the UFC, honestly. Okay, so he had a submission loss on his record too. When was that? That must have been a long time ago. Yeah, that was like his 5th fight against Gareth McClellan. Wow, that's a name I have not heard in a long time, Gareth McClellan. But anyway, So yeah, DDP has been pretty hard to put away over his career, and I don't see Strickland, who has essentially no finishes at middleweight that I can think of, being able to be the guy to put away DDP. So okay, that was a bit of an overstatement. He did finish Abus Magomedov, um, Strickland did, but either way, he's not a finisher like that. That was his only finish win since Brendan Allen in 2020. So, yeah, I'm going to take DDP here, but I think DDP by decision might be a good bet. If not, just betting that the fight goes to decision, I think is a good move. Um, DDP is the more athletic fighter. I don't think that's, terribly controversial to say. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter, considering that he can go to the grappling more reliably. And I definitely think he's the harder hitter, the more power puncher, more explosive fighter. So give me DDP in this fight. The odds are a little crazy for me to have DDP at minus 200 in a fight that the last fight pretty much came down to one round. Um, it's a little crazy to have him at minus 200, but I am confident in him, and I think that he's somebody who grows and will adapt better in the cage. And again, that thing with Strickland talking about it before, and other guys that have trained with him or fought him talked about it, that like he kind of shocks you at first, and then when you come back to him, you can kind of figure it out a little bit easier. So I expect DDP to figure things out in this fight. As crazy as a man as he is, and as wild as he looks in the cage, he is a relatively cerebral fighter, believe it or not. The Heavy Hands boys talk about this before, but there was a couple fights he had. I believe I think it was the Brad Spars fight in particular, where he's fighting looking exhausted. He's fighting looking like he's just trying to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. And then they interview him after the fight, and he remembers like finite details of specific minutes in the round. And it's kind of crazy that like somebody who looks like he is button mashing on the controller is actually running and is actually remembering and running through all the techniques that he used in that fight. So yeah, definitely somebody who kind of takes you off guard in terms of his thoughtfulness and his approach. And I think that he can adapt from the first fight better than Strickland and get the victory this Saturday. So give me DDP in this fight. Bet the over if you want to play it safe, though, because if Strickland does win, it will be by decision. Now, co-main event, and this is the last fight that I'm, really excited for on this card. I mean, there's another two or three that I'm pretty excited for, but this is a very high-level fight here. For the strawweight belt, for the women's strawweight belt, you have Zhang Weili, the champion, making her yearly title defense, her regularly scheduled once-a-year title defense against the contender, who a lot of people felt like could have gotten to the belt a lot earlier if she hadn't been slowed down by injuries and things like that in her career, in Tatiana Suarez. So Tatiana Suarez is coming into this fight as a slight favorite, which I find to be kind of ridiculous, honestly. Zhang Weili is 35, so she is getting to that age where we see fighters typically drop off. I do feel like she struggled a bit in her last fight, even though she won very dominantly. There was a couple moments where she looked outpaced and outclassed on the feet against Yan Xiaonan. Now, of course, that is a fight where Weili finished her twice. She finished her with strikes and with a choke, but it went to decision. Crazy fight. Highly recommend you guys go back and watch that. I think it really got overshadowed because of the Holloway Gaethje fight that happened right before it, which was like a huge adrenaline dump for everybody involved. But Weili looked good in that fight, but she did show some maybe not holes in her game. I mean, I guess holes in the striking sense, but more than anything, I did think that we started to see her get a little old. And if she's gotten old overnight, as can frequently happen in the sport, Tatiana Suarez, who is a young, hungry contender, may be able to take advantage of that. Now, Tatiana Suarez, obviously doesn't have the experience level of Weili, who's been the champion for a few years now, has fought the likes of women like Young Jacek, Yan Xiaonan, Amanda Lemos. She's fought a lot of great fighters at this weight class. Jessica Andrade. The list goes on and on. Tisha Torres. Suarez does not have that kind of resume, but she's shown exceptional skills. She has beaten Andrade recently. So yeah, I mean, although Suarez hasn't had that resume, like I said, she is so much younger. She's so much hungrier than Weili. Oh, wait a second. Oh, she's 34. Tatiana Suarez is 34. Zhang Weili is 35. All right, everybody's talking about this fight like Weili's old, like she's old news, like she's over the hill, and Tatiana's is young. She's a year younger than her. She's not some spring chicken. And considering the amount of injuries that Tatiana Suarez has gone through in her career, and you know, there's a high likelihood that she's fighting through one right now as we speak. I don't think she should be a favorite in this fight. Whoops, I hit the mic. I don't think she should be a favorite in this fight. I'm talking with my hands too much. The jersey in me, you know what I mean? But yeah, I really don't think Suarez should be a favorite in this fight. I feel like Wei Li has much better striking than Suarez, like leagues ahead. And although Wei Li is not as good a grappler as Suarez, she's a very good grappler in her own right. And I'd be shocked if she can't keep Suarez off of her, or at least survive until the second or third round, where we've seen Suarez get tired throughout her career over and over. She always gets tired in that third round. Against Nina Ansaroff, she dropped off very hard in that third round. All her other fights, pretty much, she's finished the gal before that or had no resistance, so she wasn't exhausted. But if Wei Li is giving her some resistance, if she's fighting a good fight, which she always does, she always comes in super prepared, super well-rounded, very explosive, really smart fighter. If she fights like that, I think we can see Suarez get very exhausted by the third round. And I think we can see Wei Li really pick things up from there on out, maybe picking up a 10-8 or a finish in the fourth or fifth round. I really love Wei Li in the spot. I really do. And to have her at plus 105, I saw in one book, absolutely insane. Give it to me all day. Come on, man. You're going to give me a proven champion who has multiple title defenses against high-ranking opponents, who's shown that she can deal with strikers, who's shown that she can deal with grapplers. She can out-grapple grapplers, as we saw with Carla Esparza. She can outstrike strikers, as we saw with Young Jacek and with Lemos. And she can grapple strikers or strike with grapplers if she wants to. You know what I mean? So I just feel like Wei Li's a very well-rounded fighter. I think she's one of the best women's fighters that we've ever seen in the sport. And unless she's gotten entirely old overnight, I expect her to beat Tatiana Suarez this weekend. Maybe by decision, maybe by late finish. But I think that third, fourth round is where she's going to separate herself from the contender and prove her championship medal. Give me Zhang Weili this weekend at underdog odds. I think it's ridiculous. Now, if you are on the side of Suarez, if you think that Weili may have gotten old or Suarez is just really that good, which she is very good, she's a great fighter. If you think that Suarez, if you have value on Suarez, if you see potential for value on Suarez, I think the play is to put her by submission in the first 3 rounds. After that, I think things are going to get very tumultuous for her, as I mentioned just now, as I laid it out. I think Suarez has a good chance early in this fight, and that chance will dwindle and dwindle and dwindle as the fight goes on. And so if you want to play the Suarez line, I think playing her by submission is the way to go. I don't see her getting a knockout over Wei Li, but I can see her getting Wei Li in a position where she can't get out of, and finding her neck or something like that. Suarez is a phenomenal grappler. She's one of the best wrestlers we've ever seen in women's MMA. Probably the best. I'll go on the record and say she's the best wrestler we've ever seen in women's MMA. And she's now in a relationship with Patchy Mix, who is the Bellator bantamweight champion. Again, one of the best fighters who are not in the UFC at the moment. I guess you could say he's the PFL. I don't know, but he asked for his release from there twice now. They haven't given him a fight. He's in the prime of his career. Regardless of that story, Patchy Mix is a great person to have in your corner and to train with and to be a partner with for Suarez, who is somebody who was able to use their wrestling for a long time but not able to find the finish every time, where Patchy Mix has a phenomenal wrestling game and arguably a better submission game that he uses the wrestling to get to. So I think Suarez has shown a lot of improvements in the last few years, and I wouldn't undermine or I wouldn't underrate the addition of Patchy Mix to her career and to her life as a part of that, I do think Suarez has a good chance this weekend, but it's just hard for me to not pick the more proven fighter here in Wei Li, to pick the fighter with the better cardio that she's shown time and time again, the fighter with the more experience, the fighter with the more explosiveness, the fighter with the much better striking, like leagues ahead in the striking. So give me Wei Li here. I'm taking Wei Li all day. All right, now we're going to start getting into some of these fights, and a lot of them kind of suck. So bear with me if I breeze through them because I'm just not that interested in a lot of these fights, and I don't think you guys are either. But we'll look for some betting value and see what we can get. First thing we have is Justin Tafa versus Talison Teixeira. Talison Teixeira making his UFC debut here. Huge fighter, 6'7", BJJ black belt or BJJ ace, I should say. I don't know if he's actually a black belt or not, but he's, that's his game. He's fighting Justin Tafa, who, if you guys aren't familiar at this point, Tafa is a slow plotting heavyweight who throws really hard. Very reminiscent of Mark Hunt, but not as skilled. Throws big leg kicks, throws big hooks, tries to knock out his opponent in every step of the way. His younger brother, Junior, is a worse version of him with even worse takedown defense and worse hands. Tafa is the better brother, older brother and better brother. And he kind of has his hands full here this weekend with Talison Teixeira, who's, as we said, super huge. Might be hard to find the chin on. But if he can get this fight to the ground, Teixeira should be leagues ahead of Tafa. I really don't know where to play in this fight. I do think that the smart money is to fight to not go the distance. I think either Tafa gets him out of there with a huge knockout in the first round, which I think the UFC wants considering they're in Australia, or Teixeira gets him to the ground and makes him look like a fish out of water. So give me the fight to not go the distance. Next, you got Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. This is one of the few fights on this card I am excited for. Rodolfo Bellato looked really good against Ihor Potieria. I mean, he was getting beat up, and then he came back. I should say, maybe he didn't look really good, but he showed a lot of heart, a lot of toughness, a lot of grit, a lot of determination, and more than anything, showed that he can stay in there when he's losing the fight. It doesn't deter him too much. And he takes on Jimmy Crute here, who's coming back after a long layoff, a layoff in which he teased retirement, thought about retirement, and now he's coming back to fight in front of a home crowd in Australia. I'll be honest, I'm very worried about Jimmy Crute in this fight. The way he was talking, the way he was acting, the way he was fighting in those last few performances just looked like his heart wasn't in it anymore. I'm concerned that he may be taking this fight just for the check. And if that's the case, somebody like Rodolfo Bellato, who is very hard to put away and has shown solid defense both on the ground and on the feet, I think he might have a great chance of putting out Crute's lights here. Bellato is somebody who can absorb the damage, as we saw against Potieria, and has pretty solid takedown defense. He's kind of built like a brick shit house, honestly. And on the feet, he throws a very solid straight left. I believe he's a southpaw. Very solid straight left and a right hook behind it. And, Crute is somebody who his striking has never really caught up to his grappling, and his grappling, honestly, is not that great in the first place. So, for me, I just feel like this is, if Crute is not 100% in this fight, which I can't imagine him to be after the layoff and after the way he was talking mentally, where he's been at, I think this is Rodolfo Bellato's fight to lose. I think he'll likely get it done by knockout, probably in the second or third round. I think Crute will start off this fight very hot, but if he can't find the finish, which I don't think he will, I think this fight just kind of, he melts as the fight goes on, and Bellato picks it up, and Bellato will find that finish in the latter half of this fight. So give me Bellato by knockout, rounds 2 or 3. Next, you got Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. I love this fight. I really do. Francisco Prado is a young gunner. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he's Peruvian or Chilean. I just want to Google that for my own. Argentina. Okay, so I wasn't terribly far off. But, yeah, so Prado is a solid striker. He throws combination. He throws pretty heavy hands. He's fighting Jake Matthews, who has grown up in the UFC. I think he made his UFC debut when he was 19, something like that, and it's been like 11 years since then. So when he made his debut, Prado, who's now only like 23, was in middle school. And that's kind of crazy to say considering that Jake Matthews is only like 31. So, for somebody who has a lot of fight miles on them, you might be worried about the durability of Matthews or something like that. But the guy's never been knocked out. He's never been finished by strikes. He has gotten knocked down a couple times when he fought Semmelsberger, and against Phil Rowe he had some trouble with the striking. But he's always had a really good grappling game, and I expect him to go to that in this fight. Like I said, Matthews is very well-rounded. Prado is a bit more striking forward, and I expect Matthews to have the advantage here on the ground, and he certainly has the advantage as far as experience goes. So I like Matthews in this matchup. I think he can get it done by decision, maybe a submission in the second or third, but I think more often than not, I think he'll win this fight by decision. I like Matthews in the spot. I haven't seen the odds, but I'd imagine that Matthews is a slight favorite, if anything. So maybe wait for the prop to drop on the over 1.5 or decision. But yeah, give me Matthews in that matchup. I like him there. Next, you have Jack Jenkins versus Gabriel Santos. This is a fight I've been going back and forth on. Santos has shown some glimpses of greatness in the octagon. Recently picking up his first victory over Yi Jia, who not that good. But his losses are to good fighters in Lerone Murphy, and he lost to David Onama, where he kind of got stopped by Onama after he got a little exhausted in that matchup. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember it correctly, I think Onama kind of came back in that fight. Yeah, it was in the second round. So now he draws Jack Jenkins, who tore his shoulder against Chepe Mariscal and came back relatively recently. I think it was the end of last year or middle of last year, against Herbert Burns in a fight where I was very confident in picking Jack Jenkins, mostly because I was picking against Herbert Burns. But Jenkins has a relatively reliable game of throwing body punches, wearing down his opponent, throwing leg kicks, throwing jabs, combination punching, and he loves to go to the body, as I just mentioned. Against Gabriel Santos, who we've seen him kind of have some cardio issues in the past, that body work may be able to pay off in the later half of this fight if Jenkins can get it going early. But I am going back and forth on this fight because it seems like Santos has a pretty decent grappling game. Seeing how he took care of Yi Jia, he was able to get the fight to the ground and control it for lengths there. Now Yi Jia is not a great wrestler. Jack Jenkins isn't a great wrestler either. It's kind of always been his his Achilles heel, I guess you can say. I don't know. It's kind of crazy to say Achilles heel. I would assume that he's perfect everywhere else, but it's always been a weakness of his for Jack Jenkins is the wrestling. Even against Burns, who, like we said, gets very exhausted, and I was confident in picking Jenkins there. Burns was able to take him down a couple times in that fight and hold him down for the rest of the round, surviving, essentially. If Santos can get him down, I expect him to do some good work there. But I do feel like Jenkins is a live dog here, and I think that with the Australian crowd, with the Australian judges, if Jenkins can land the better power, if he can land the more decisive strikes, and Santos picks up a couple of rounds of control, it might not mean much. Those minutes of control might not mean much if Jenkins can pick up huge moments and win the fight that way. So I kind of do like Jenkins here in the underdog spot. I'll be honest, this is a little bit of a heart pick because I have a soft spot for Jenkins. I like his style and I like his approach and I like his mustache. I think he's a cool guy. So I'm going to take Jenkins here in the underdog spot. I'm not super confident in it, but I think he has enough tools to be able to get this fight going and pick it up as the fight goes on. So give me Jenkins here. Now this is the fight I'm maybe not most excited for, but I'm very excited for this fight. Comparative to the main and co-main, it's not touching those, but it's a very, very interesting striking matchup here at lightweight between Tom Nolan and Vyacheslav Borshev. Now Borshev, somebody who I've been a huge fan of ever since I've seen him make his debut and his fights on the Contender Series. He's got a very fun style to watch, striking heavy approach, obviously. A lot of knees to the body, a lot of body work in general, great hand speed, great hand combinations. Kind of reminded me of Petr Yan in that sense when he came into the scene because he had that kind of really mean sting on his punches, really mean punches. It looks like mean combinations. He's there to hurt his opponent, and he draws Tom Nolan, who is a huge lightweight. Came in as a minus 1,000 against Nicholas Mota and got knocked out in the first round. Since then, had a pretty decent performance in his last fight, but I don't expect Vyacheslav to be able to come out and just nuke him like that. I think that Nolan kind of got caught off guard there because Mota was billed as a striker, and he proved that he was, a well-rounded fighter in that fight. I'm sorry, billed as a grappler and proved that he was a well-rounded fighter in that fight. So yeah, I think that this is a really interesting fight because, again, Borshev loves to go to the body and Nolan is very tall and long. So you got to imagine that the body is going to be exposed for Borshev in this fight. And I think that he'll be able to find it with relative success in the first couple rounds. And I'm kind of sounding like a broken record here at this point. Last couple fights I've mentioned this, but if Borshev can, work the body early and wear down Tom Nolan, he might be able to find a finish in this fight. But ultimately, I do expect this to be a very fun fight to watch. Both these guys have very interesting striking approaches and very creative striking. I do side with Borshev here, given that he's the more proven fighter, given that he has a great skill set, and went to draw with Nazim Sadikov, which was an awesome fight. Highly recommend you guys check that out if you haven't already. But Borshev's weakness has always been his grappling, and Nolan is not that guy, pal. You know what I mean? Like he's a decent grappler, but I don't think he'll be able to take advantage of Borshev on the ground as somebody like Chase Hooper was able to do. So I'm not sure who to pick in this fight outright, but I am leaning towards Borshev. I don't know what the odds are, but I'd imagine that if anything, Nolan would be a slight favorite. If anything, maybe a pick'em. But I like Borshev in this matchup. Give me Borshev here. Let's go down the card. We got Wang Kong making a pretty quick comeback from her first loss and her finish loss. And she's taking on Bruna Brazil. Bruna Brazil coming out of the Fighting Nerds. Very inconsistent fighter. We've seen her show up and look great against women like Molly McCann, and then we've seen her shown up and completely shit the bed against women like Loma Lookboonmee. Kind of hard to get a read on Bruna, I'll be honest, but like I said, Wang Kong is coming off of that first loss of her career, or at least her first loss in the UFC, and it was a pretty brutal one where she got dropped and then submitted. Now she got dropped pretty hard in that fight, and like that was only in like November, and we're having this fight in February. So if Wang Kong is not 100% recovered from that shot or recovered from that fight, we could see Bruna Brazil have some success with her striking here. She does have some pretty powerful hands, but ultimately I think her grappling is her real showcase. And I do feel like Bruna has the skills to make this fight very ugly for Wang Kong. I'm just concerned about what version of Bruna will show up. Given that inconsistency, I think you'd be a madman to bet on her here. But she is a big underdog, so I understand if you are enticed by it. But yeah, I think this is a fight you either dog or pass. I think you got to stay away from this one. If you are going to take the odds on Wang Kong, if you're going to eat the chalk, I think you take her by finish or by knockout. But ultimately, I think I'm going to stay away from this fight. Maybe Wang Kong by decision might be a juicy prop. Maybe we see her take a little bit more of a cautious approach here after getting finished in her last fight, essentially by, she got finished because she was kind of being wild in the pocket. Maybe we see Wang Kong take a cautious approach here and she wins this fight by decision. If they have juicy odds on that, take a stab at it. But honestly, I would probably stay away from this fight altogether. This is going to be a crapshoot. We'll see where. It's just hard to get a read on both of these women, where they're at in their career and where they might be able to go in their career. Considering the inconsistencies we've seen from both of them. So, yeah, again, I think this is, dog or pass, or mostly just pass. Stay away from this one. Next, you have a bantamweight fight between two UFC debuting fighters, which has, in my opinion, the most hype on the card for, the caliber of opponent that we're seeing here. We have Colby Thickness, Witness the Thickness, making his UFC debut against Alexandre Pantoja. Alexandre Topuria, also making his debut. Now, Topuria, as you may recognize, is the older brother of Ilia Topuria, current featherweight champion, and pound for pound list placeholder is Ilia Topuria. Now, his older brother Alexandre Topuria, watching his regional tape, reminds me of Topuria in the sense that they kind of move the same. Obviously they train together, so that's not a surprise there. But reminds me a lot of Topuria in his early career because he likes to go to the grappling. And his grappling is really good. Now, we have seen him get exhausted in a fight that went a little bit later, and I think that might be where Colby can pick things up if the fight ends up going into a little bit of deeper water. Can Topuria maintain that pace? If he implodes, Colby will be there, and he will be there to find a finish. Topuria's striking looks pretty solid, but again, I think his grappling is really how he butters his bread. And he takes on Colby Thickness here, who I could literally say the same thing. His striking is relatively solid, but his grappling is really what you are going to write home about. In particular, he's a very good scrambler, and he knows how to find the back in a lot of those positions. So if Topuria is in a position where he's not finding a ton of success on the feet, he goes for a takedown. We can see Colby scramble out and take the back of Topuria and win around that way, or find a choke. We could see Topuria, or we could see Thickness scramble and scramble and scramble and make Topuria fight for position to the point of exhaustion, a la Arman Tsarukyan versus Islam Makhachev, or any other Arman Tsarukyan fight you can find where he grapples. Yeah, I just think that there's a few ways that Colby can get this fight done. And, ultimately, Topuria is a huge favorite because of his last name. I don't think if he had a different last name, I really don't think he'd be this big of a favorite in this spot. People are saying that he's just as good as his brother, or maybe even better. That's bullshit. Watch his tape. He's not as good as Topuria, but not many people in the sport are. So he's not as good as Ilya, I should say, but not many people in the sport are. So, it's not like crazy. I'm not talking shit on the guy or, trying to trash him or anything, but, he is the lesser known brother and the lesser skilled brother. That being said, he does have a lot of skills of his own, and that grappling in particular. I'm just concerned about the cardio of Topuria, and a big thing for me too is level of competition that these guys have fought. If you look at the level of competition, Colby has fought guys who were like 5-1, 7-2, that kind of thing. He also had a pretty extensive amateur career. Now he's undefeated as a pro at 7-0. And if you look at Topuria's record, he's fighting guys who are like 1-8, 0-18, shit like that, 7-14, like these kind of records. And that doesn't speak well to me. That doesn't jump off the page to me if I'm looking at somebody who's a minus 400 favorite. If you've only fought bums and you're making your debut against a guy who has fought relatively decent competition for where he's at. Now you can look at the the camps that they're with and make a storyline out of it there. Obviously, Topuria trains with Ilya, or Alexandre trains with his older brother or his younger brother Ilya, and Colby trains in Australia with Volkanovski. You can make some kind of little, you can put together something there if you really are reaching for it. But I personally just feel like the underdog odds on Colby, for fighting in a hometown crowd, for having a more proven record, for having the better cardio, I think it's a fair bet to put Colby Thickness as a in your underdog slip or anything like that, to throw a tenner on him or something at plus 330. It's not that I just don't think he should be this big of an underdog here. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure that I'll pick him, but I wouldn't be shocked if he gets it done here. Now, if Topuria does get it done, I expect it to be first or second round finish, as most of his victories have come. So maybe wait for the odds on that, see what that looks like. But yeah, let's keep going down the card. That's a fight I'm really excited for, though. And Colby's somebody that posts on Reddit a lot. I've interacted with the guy on Reddit before. Witness the Thickness, I think is his name. And I've kind of seen him grow up there. So I do have a soft spot in my heart for him, and I hope he gets it done this weekend. I think this is a good spot for him. But we'll see what happens. Another thing you got to think about too is this is on short notice, so maybe the cardio factor won't really play out. If Colby's not in great shape, that cardio might not be a tool for him. Next, you have Jonathan McAuliffe versus Kevin Jousset. Kevin Jousset should get this done relatively easily. I think he's the cleaner striker. I think he has better cardio. I think he'll be able to put this together. I don't really have much more to say on that fight. So, Jousset. Next, you have Rong Zhu versus Cody Steele. This is a sneaky spot here because Cody Steele is a really good fighter. Rong Zhu is a solid fighter, but Cody Steele's not as proven as Rong Zhu, and Rong Zhu's coming in as a big underdog. I think a lot of people think that Steele will be able to run through Zhu here, and I'm not opposed to that thought. I'm not opposed to that line of logic. I think that he's a more explosive fighter. I think he's a better fighter, honestly. But what gets me a little bit is his striking defense and his cardio. And if Rong Zhu can stay in this fight until the second round or towards the end of the second round and kind of pick it up as it goes on, I could see him getting some good work done on the striking against Cody Steele. If Cody Steele can get this fight to the ground early, I could see him washing Wong Zhu out of there relatively quickly. So, I think this is a fight maybe you bet on it to not go the distance, or, put Steele by finish. Otherwise, I don't know, man. I probably wouldn't bet on this fight anyway. These prelims suck. Let's keep going down. You got Anshul Jubilee versus Quillan Salkilde. I don't know this guy, but Anshul Jubilee lost to a guy barking at him, Mike Breeden. He showed very little heart in that fight, and I think a lot of odds makers and fans are going to clown on him in this matchup. I have no idea who this other guy is, but he's a huge favorite because Jubilee had that moment with Breeden, and everybody saw him kind of lose his heart in there. So I'm just going to stay away from this, but if anything, maybe Salkilde by finish. I don't know. Park Hyun Sung versus Nyam Jargol Tumem Bedemburl. This is going to be a fun one for the announcer. I, again, just don't know these fighters too well. I'd stay away from it. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I wish I had more info for you guys, but that's, it is what it is. Let's do the betting slip. For UFC 312, here it comes. It's going to be a short one, but hopefully it'll be a good one. We did pretty good last week. We did good in the first week of the year. Second week, not so much. But, we're back in the winning column with 6-2 last week. So, main event, I'm going to take Duplessis. Money line. Maybe over 2.5. Might be a good bet. Co-main event, I'm going to take Zhang Weili money line. I'm going to take Rodolfo Bellato by knockout, second or third round. I'm going to take Jake Matthews by decision. And I'll take a stab on Jack Jenkins and Colby Thickness as underdogs on the prelims. So altogether, we'll do Duplessis, we'll do Weili, we'll do Bellato, we'll do Matthews, and then Jenkins and Colby Thickness as our underdog spots there. As always, I recommend that you round robin, play it safe. If you're putting fucking $50 on a parlay with these guys to win $3,000 or whatever, you're out of your goddamn mind. At least one of these guys are probably going to lose. It is what it is. That's the sport. If you round robin that $50, you might not win them all, but you'll at least make back like $200 or $300, and that's much better than losing 50. You know what I mean? So stay smart out there. Bet responsibly, for God's sakes. You know what I mean? I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I wish I had more info on some of these prelim fights, but it is what it is. I am not going to be watching this fight live. I'm going to be catching it later. Maybe I can catch the co-main and main event. We'll see what happens. But, yeah, ultimately, I think it's going to be a kind of shitty fight card that ends up in a couple of really high-level matchups in the co-main and main event, and I'm excited for that. Stay tuned for the Dominick Cruz retrospective. It's coming out very shortly. I've been cutting things up, writing things down, and I'm excited to share it with y'all. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching. I love y'all. Peace out.